Bernie turned. From one perspective, flamenco and heavy metal might seem as far apart as the sun and moon, but if you think about the hyperbolic emotion involved in both genres, there's a certain spiritual connection. Abstractions aside, however, there's a more concrete connection between the two forms in the person of Bernie Rico, the man behind some of guitardom's most flamboyant instruments, BC Rich guitars. Bernardo Chavez Rico was born in Los Angeles in 1941, actually in East Los Angeles, home to the city's largely Hispanic population. Growing up in a guitar-oriented culture, Mr. Rico came from a guitar household. His father, Bernardo Mason Rico, was a guitar maker with a shop where he built guitars, vihuelos, requintos, bajosetos, and other instruments for the Mexican-oriented musicians in LA, playing in local Latino conjuntos and mariachi orchestras. He also sold guitar-making parts through the mail. The Rico shop was originally known as the Valencian Guitar Shop in and around 1947, and later as Casa Rico. Eventually, as Bernie joined his dad, it became known as Bernardo's Guitar Shop. Mr. Rico began playing guitar at an early age, as primarily a flamenco and classical guitarist. He studied with Sabicas when he came to LA, which he did a lot on his way down to Mexico to see the bullfights. He got to meet all the players coming through, including a young Paco de Lucia and Montoya. Montoya used to compare himself with Sabicas, saying that he was the box office draw. Bernie also studied with the great Mario Escudero for 3 years and learned to play with very high action on guitar. But Sabicas was his main influence. He and Bernie were like godfather to son. Bernie Rico had begun working in his father's shop as early as 1953 or 1954, building ukuleles out of koa. Soon thereafter, the American folk music boom began, and Rico recalls that his father's shop made banjos and retrofitted a lot of banjo necks on other brands. Prior to 1964, they also converted a lot of Martin guitars to 12 strings, because Martin didn't make 12 strings before 1964. Rico also remembers building some steel guitars during those early days as well. It was working with the banjos that taught him what he knows about tone, timbre, all tension, with tension hoops and place of struts. In a way, you can say that Sabicas not only was the main influence on Rico's guitar playing, but was also the main influence on his guitar making. One day, Sabicas took Rico aside and told him, quote, "My son, I want to play a guitar you made for me," end quote. And Bernie Rico made his first guitar for Sabicas. Bernie Rico continued to make acoustic guitars. However, by the mid-60s, many of his customers for guitars were country musicians, and, well, the name Bernie Rico just didn't make it with country players. As it happened, ironically enough, Rico had a friend named Bobby Rich, who had adopted an Hispanic stage name, Roberto Rico. Reversing the process, Bernie Rico changed his guitar name to BC Rich, so, in a way, the BC Rich name came from Bernie's friend Bobby, although all the parts were actually just Anglo adaptations of his own family's names. This was in around 1966 or 1967. Up until 1968, Rico made only acoustic guitars. Probably only about 300 of these acoustics were built. In 1968, Rico built his first custom electric solid body. At that time, he was doing a lot of refinishing and repair work. He had an assistant working for him who suggested that he start getting a more avant-garde in his finishes. And since he was riding a lot of motorcycles with fancy paint jobs at the time, this made sense. This is where the BC Rich tradition of wild finishes originated. That year, a customer came in with a Fender guitar neck and asked Bernie to make a body for the neck. Bernie had to go over to Hollywood to get advice about how to wire the guitar once it was built. This led to his first attempts at guitar production in the form of about 10 Les Paul-shaped guitars and basses modeled after the Gibson EB3. Around 1972, Bernie and an employee named Bob Hall started developing a model they called the Seagull, which has no connection to the Godin Guitars acoustic brand. It was the company's first production electric guitar, and it came to market in 1974. Up to that time, the store's phone greeting was Bernardo's Guitar Shop. One day, Stitch answered the phone with B.C. Rich, and some think that's the moment the company's name changed and it became a full-fledged guitar manufacturer with a mission. B.C. Rich's intention was to make a production line custom guitar with high quality and craftsmanship that was very expensive for the day, says Stitch. In 1977, they were $999 retail, and you were paying more than retail if you could actually find one. Although B.C. Rich was often referred to as custom shop at the time, it wasn't custom in the conventional sense of the word. The guitars were handcrafted, but they were still production guitars. People might request special inlays, or maybe Bartolini high A pickups instead of DiMarzios, but basically it was a production line guitar. The company had facilities in both California and Tijuana, Mexico. All the workers were from Mexico, and both shops freely interchanged parts. For the electric guitars, Bernie would send wood, fretboards, frets, inlays, glues, and other materials over to Mexico, and then drive down once a month to pick up the assembled guitars, which were then painted and finally assembled in LA. The steel string acoustics, however, were made right there in LA. In 1977, while Bernie was in Japan, Moser went into the wood shop one day and crafted the company's edgiest design to date, the 10-string bitch. According to Stitch, when Bernie returned to the shop and saw the new project, he got upset and yelled, "You guys don't design guitars without me." The model's name stems from a trip Moser and his wife made to the county fair. They noticed some girls wearing charms on their necklaces that read "Rich Bitch," and they agreed that would be an ideal name. Of course, the T was dropped. That model led to the 6-string bitch and the Son of a Rich, an American-made economy version with a bolt-on neck and bodies machine-made by Wayne Charvel. Initially, there was some concern that dealers would reject the guitar based on its risque name, but after some dealers from Utah, the most conservative state in the Union, gave it the green light, the name stuck. B.C. Rich Guitars' bodies always pushed the envelope of guitar design, and as the years progressed, the shapes got even more extreme. During the 80s, the wild shapes of B.C. Rich guitars proved to be the perfect match for the over-the-top theatrics of the burgeoning heavy metal craze. The image of Wasp's Blackie Lawless dripping in blood while clutching a B.C. Rich widow in one hand and a skull in the other was just one of the many that catapulted B.C. Rich to being the #1 guitar company as metal came to rule the airwaves. The company grossed around $175,000 when Mel Stitch started working there, and with the introduction of the NJ series, it was up to about $10 million by the time he left. He was vice president of the B.C. Rich during its ascent. Although B.C. Rich has crafted an identity as a metal guitar company, it actually started as one of the first boutique electric guitar makers. It was among the first to introduce neck-through body 24-fret guitars and heelless neck joints. Many respected artists outside the metal community, including studio great Carlos Alomar from David Bowie, popmeister Neil Giraldo from Pat Benatar, and jazz guitarist Robert Conte were proponents of B.C. Rich guitar. Introduced in 1981, the company's next guitar, the Warlock, featured a shape inspired by the bitch, and it went on to become one of the most iconic B.C. Riches ever. The Widow, designed by Blackie Lawless, and the Stealth, designed by Mockingbird user Rick Derringer, followed in 1983. By that point, B.C. Rich had a complete catalog of distinctive instruments, and it wasn't long before overseas companies like Aria were creating B.C. Rich knockoffs. Bernie went into survival mode and flew to Japan with Hiro Misawa to set up the B.C. Rich NJ series, which stood for Nagoya, Japan, where they were made. The company's first Japanese guitars were labeled BC Rico and did not feature the NJ series designation. Trouble appeared soon after when Rico Reeds, makers of the saxophone and clarinet reeds, sued BC Rich for patent infringement on the name. In the mid-1980s, BC Rich saw major changes that would send the company in a new direction. Stitch left in 1984 and Moser left in 1985, and in 1987, Bernie entered into a marketing agreement with Randy Waltuck's Class Axe, allowing them to market and distribute Rave, Platinum, and the NJ Series guitars. A year later, Bernie licensed the Rave and Platinum names to Class Axe, which essentially took over importing, marketing, and distribution of the foreign-made lines, and soon after, complete control was turned over to Class Axe, and BC Rich Custom Shop was disbanded. Class Axe licensed the name BC Rich in 1989. During this period, quality control nosedived and BC Rich's name suffered. Bernie was out of the company picture for a few years, and during that time he produced Mason Bernard guitars, handmade acoustic electrics and Strat-shaped electrics. In 1993, Bernie regained ownership of BC Rich and made a concerted effort to restore the company's name. Sadly, on December 3, 1999, he passed away from a sudden heart attack. His son took over control to Hanser Music Group in 2001 and began making guitars under the Rico Jr. name. However, he is involved with some current BC Rich custom shop guitars. As part of its recently revamped custom operation, BC Rich has also famed builder Grover Jackson aboard to work on the Gunslinger handcrafted series. The company continues to evolve and release visually striking designs that, like its legacy designs, appeal to both younger metal players and elder statesmen of the genre like Slayer's Kerry King. Its Pro X Bitch model was voted Best of NAMM in the electric guitar category at NAMM 2011.